Thank you, Linda. We can go live. Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you and welcome to join this very exciting webinar. This is part of a series of the AUDA NEPAD webinar communication series. So this one is dedicated to the Southern Africa region. So we do have several participants from the region, as well as our very distinguished speakers who are well-seasoned journalists and media personalities. This morning, we are also graced by the presence of our AUDA NEPAD CEO, the distinguished Dr. Ibrahim Asani Mayaki, who will be making some welcoming remarks. But before we go into the program in earnest, which shall be projected soon, let me just note a couple of things. That since February, when COVID was announced, COVID has disrupted a lot of lives, a lot of systems, and indeed livelihoods based on income. Now, from a communications point of view, several changes have happened. This includes, for instance, how health messages are communicated. Our news have been inundated with updates around COVID, and sometimes there can be so much news that people get confused and the messages are not coming out appropriately. And the second thing is that there has been a loss of revenue and jobs on the media. Someone was mentioning the other day that the media rooms are shrinking. So this has an impact on how we can communicate appropriate news in a timely manner to the right audiences. And now also there's a transitioning from the face-to-face communication and print communication to online communications. This also has its own challenges and limitations, as we well can appreciate that in Africa, most countries do not have access to functional electrical systems. And therefore also, this would have an impact on how much bandwidth they can have and if they can have access to internet for them to be able to have the news at the right time. So the objective of these webinars are basically fourfold: to increase the level of understanding of the impact of COVID on different African societies and households. And secondly, the webinars are acting as a platform for sharing current information and updating on the scientific and other sector priorities. Thirdly, this is also probably a huge opportunity for how we can explore innovations around co-creating solutions and finding the best communication means to deliver the news at the appropriate time. And last but not least, these webinars are serving as an important mechanism to highlight what AUDA NEPAD has been doing around addressing and communicating the impacts and the challenges of COVID. Now, this morning, we have a very rich program. As I highlighted, we have several speakers from the region, very seasoned journalists, and if I may have the program projected on the screen, Linda, I would appreciate. Okay, as Linda is projecting the program, I can just note that our first speaker is going to be Dr. Mayaki, who will give our welcoming remarks. Then we'll move to my colleague, Ms. Fatinzi Hassan, who's the head of the HCID Capital and Institutional Development. And then we'll have two sections of the panelists. First will be Ms. Patiswa, and then it will be Ms. Mia Malan. I will introduce them as they come on stage. Then the next set of panelists, four of them, will be Mr. Chilu Lemba, Mr. Charles Mukulka, Ms. Doreen Chilumbunawa, and Mr. Kizito Sikuka. And then we shall have an open discussion whereby participants can pose their questions and chat in the question Q&A as well as the chat boxes. Please note that only the speakers as allocated will be allowed mic space and airtime. Otherwise, participants, may you kindly just post your questions on the boxes as I indicated. Then we're going to have a webinar feedback through what is called a Mentimeter. Teko will explain how the Mentimeter works, and then we shall be able to follow through with it and post our feedback information. Then we shall be having a wrap up and closing remarks by my colleague, Ms. Mwanja Nganjo, and then the webinar should conclude at about 12:45 with a vote of thanks from myself, Boitshepo Bibi Giosi, who has been appointed as your moderator for this very important webinar. So without further ado, let me also note that there is bilingual interpretation from English to French and French to English, and thanks to Charles and Debbie, who are at the helm of the simultaneous interpretations. So without further ado, may I please invite the distinguished Dr. Ibrahim Asani Mayaki to give us his welcoming remarks. Dr. Mayaki, over to you, and may you project the slide that he has kindly provided us. Dr. Mayaki, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Bibi. First of all, let me thank our guests and the panelists and the speakers for having taken their time to come and have this conversation with us. We do not take it for granted. And I would like, in the name of the agency and the staff of the agency, to really thank them sincerely, because I am absolutely convinced that, as in the other regions, in this region, we will learn a lot, and it will feed not only our thinking, but our practices of implementing development programs on the ground. So we are honored to have you. And I would like you to know that we really appreciate your presence. So I will go through 6 quick points, but I wanted to share this cartoon. I'll start by a little bit of humor. You see, it's a woman who is saying to a man, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane." So it was published in the New Yorker, I think, yesterday. I found it quite striking. And I also discovered a concept which I didn't know at all, which is infobesity, which is information overload, and how information overload can create anxiety. So I hope my level of sanity is still adequate in order to make my welcoming remarks, and I will go straight to my remarks and focus them on 6 points. The first one is about the unknown. We were somehow surprised as the African Union by the pandemic, and being surprised by the unknown, we tried to respond as best as we could. But it is important to highlight the fact that institutionally, we were not prepared, and we were not the only ones. I mean, the world was not prepared institutionally to face this pandemic. So the level and the quality of the responses can be analyzed through different lenses, but it's important to flag the particular fact that our preparedness was not adequate, hence our response could not be optimal. And I think this has been seen all over the world, from South America to India, to Afghanistan, to Malawi, to Niger, to Mali. So what did we learn by facing the unknown? We learned a lesson of humility. And that lesson of humility is linked to our capacity to auto-criticize ourselves, criticize in the correct sense of the word. The institutions which have been able to analyze themselves and look at the limits of their preparedness were better able to respond adequately to the pandemic, whether on the health issues, the employment issues, the social issues, the economic issues, the security issues. So this is my first point. The information we had at the beginning was not adequate, and our level of preparedness was not adequate either, but we tried to respond. So my second point is, how did Africa try to respond? First of all, what is quite satisfactory is the fact that the African Union, from the first case in Egypt, gathered all the health ministers of the continent in Addis Ababa at the African Union Commission. And together with the CDC, they defined a roadmap. And that roadmap had two pillars. The first pillar was a clear handbook from WHO on how to manage this pandemic, based on the lessons we had learned from Ebola and other epidemics. And the second pillar was the creation of a network of national CDCs with the support of WHO. And about 35 CDCs were created nationally in order to collect the necessary information on the spread of the virus, and in order to assist public and private entities on the adequate responses at national level. And today we have, in most African countries, we have this network of national CDCs. So the response, before being a medical response, was a political response, using the mechanisms of regional integration of the African Union. So that's how Africa responded. And I think it has had repercussions, consequences positively on how we have been able to deal regarding the health dimension with the pandemic. Now, the third point I would like to flag is the fact that we still have a lot to learn. What this pandemic has shown is enormous and passionate, deep debates, even among scientists, on how to best respond. When you look at the debates around the vaccine, I mean, you have a span of analytical views that go from, the vaccine will be ready, a vaccine will be ready in 3 months, to a vaccine will not be ready before 20 months. I was attending last week a meeting. I was invited to attend a meeting of G20 foreign ministers. And one of almost the main issue which was discussed was that issue of a vaccine, because the vaccine is like a mechanism which helps us mentally restrain and reduce the unknown and help us plan better. So we are clinging to that vaccine all over the world, but with a level of uncertainty which is very high. And it is an interesting situation, because amidst all the capacities that we have demonstrated, amongst all the modern technologies that we have, we are still in a situation of high uncertainty, clinging to something which we don't know when it will happen and when it will be safe to go through a vaccine. My fourth point is linked to that, is about uncertainty. And there is a big question here that we should ask ourselves. When uncertainty is deep, how can you strategize? Because logically, you define a strategy on the basis of sound data, sound information, and you project yourself in the future with actions that you intend to take. But when you are in a deep uncertainty with limited data, limited information being how we interpret the data. So how do you define your strategy? How do we define a strategy regarding the consequences of a pandemic in the continent? How we tackle the issues of unemployment? We were already struggling to tackle high levels of unemployment because most of workers in Africa are in the informal sector. We were already struggling with that. And we had classical responses. And Fatih, my colleague, will talk about micro, small, and medium enterprises, which I consider a good example of response. But we had that response before, and we are using that response today. But still, given the high level of uncertainty, the strategies we are defining, we are not totally sure that they will work. So navigating within that uncertainty is the most critical dimension. Let me talk about the continent of all our African Union institutions, because we need to be agile. We need to be to adapt to a new reality, and we need to think differently in terms of designing our policies. The time of the experts who know everything and who can draft a solution and be sure that the solution will work, that time of certainty is gone. In a time of uncertainty, when you are not fully sure of the solutions that you are proposing, you need to associate the civil society, the private sector, local communities to the design of the solutions that you want to propose. Otherwise, you fail, and you fail in a very lamentable manner. My fifth point is about the consequences. You know the data about the US, Europe, Asia, of the consequences of the lockdowns, and enormous segments of GDP will go out of the picture. In the case of the continent, we will lose dozens of billions of dollars in our GDP. If I look at South Africa and you make an addition of the IMF support plus the World Bank support, it is less than the loss of national revenue in South Africa. And South Africa, compared to other African countries, is quite well endowed in many advantages that other countries do not have. So we are entering a situation where social, economic, and mental consequences will be very high. So how can we respond to that? We cannot respond to it as experts. Expertise is essential because expertise allows you to shed light on certain parts of the unknown, but it is not enough. So a collective response, which has a high level of ownership, becomes absolutely essential. And maybe it will lead us, and that's my final point, it will lead us to some types of social reforms. The pandemic is one thing. The virus, the spread of the virus is being stopped. The bell curves are, ending quite satisfactorily in the continent. but the socio-economic consequences are still not fully grasped. And the question that our populations will ask is, where our institutions pertinent, credible, and adapted to respond to that type of crisis? We have heard about many different types of crises: financial crisis, small and medium economic crisis. But this type of crisis is a societal crisis. So it has a consequence, a direct consequence on the quality of the institutions. And at the end of the day, what will be asked to all of us is, are our institutions pertinent enough to deal with this crisis? And it applies to us as the development agency of the African Union. This is why I want to end my remarks with a high level of humility. We need to be humble. We will succeed collectively, or will fail collectively. But in that success, many reforms need to take place. Reforms in terms of mindset, reforms in terms of institutional quality, reforms in terms of the way we design our policies, which can no longer be top-down. And we need to be humble and listen to you, media actors, because you have been at the forefront. You have opened your eyes and your ears. You have applied your tools, and you have provided a reality. And feeding us with this reality can help us do better. And this is why humility is the name of our game. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayaki. I always like how you frame your points into a very succinct between 3 and 5 points you always have. And I really like your concept of infobesity. And interestingly, we are not just dealing with information overload in terms of what you define as infobesity, but I think we are also having to deal with our own physical challenges of overweight and obesity because of the lockdowns and lack of exercise, and only making a trip between the bedroom and the kitchen and the refrigerator. So the points you highlight are very pertinent. So lots of unknowns and lots of uncertainty. Hence, we have to exercise a very strong level of humility and a very strong mindset change across the way we work with systems, with policies and programs. And indeed, our institutions are not well poised to handle this crisis. So this provides an opportunity actually to reform our institutions in a way that they will be very timelessly responsive to the emergencies, to the challenges, while we also prepare for the medium to long-term co-created solutions inclusive of the private sector, civil society, and non-government organizations, and include, of course, also the grassroots level communities with high level of participation around it. So an opportunity for innovation, innovative solutions. So thank you once again very much, Dr. Mayaki. Really appreciate your welcome remarks. Without further ado, let me call on my colleague, Ms. Fatin Z. Hassan, who is the head of Human Capital and Institutional Development. He will be talking to us on the small, medium, and micro enterprises, and particularly engaging the youth and how we can manage this pandemic by involving the youth to overcome the crisis. Over to you, Fatih. You have 5 to 7 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bibi. I will keep to the time. Thank you for the reminder on nutrition and keeping fit during this time of pandemic and lockdown. I would also like to thank the CEO for the opportunity and setting the tone of my presentation. Good morning to all. Good morning, members of the press. Good morning, all colleagues. I'll try to keep to the time. Let me just start with a study that we conducted in 2015. In 2015, we conducted this study and we found out that by 2030, 440 million youth will be on the African job markets. So that means that these youth are already born. It's not a projection, it's not an estimation, it's something that is undoubtedly happening. So we have an opportunity with this youth. If we help them, if we provide them job opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities, and we can support them to build a decent life, then they can contribute to making the Africa we want happen. If we fail to provide these opportunities to our youth, then we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. And we have seen examples of social unrest when the youth is not provided with opportunities, with a decent life, and also with hope for the future. I would like to also refer to Agenda 2063 and the first 10-year implementation plan. In this plan, there's a focus on African-owned companies. This plan says that we should support them to increase their contribution to the number or the proportion of manufactured goods sold on the continent. You know that most of the manufactured goods sold on the continent provide from imports. So it's against this background and other also input that we launched in 2019, September 2019, the 100,000 SMEs Initiative. The vision of the 100,000 SMEs Initiative is to create one digital space and a network of grassroots partner organizations providing services to micro, small, and medium enterprises, what we call MSMEs. This is to allow them to grow and to create more jobs. So the services are in the areas of the three pillars for entrepreneurship: access to market, development of strategic business capabilities, and also access to finance. And we acknowledge the fact that these services need to be tailored to serve the specific needs of African MSMEs. We know that there are about 85 to 95 million MSMEs in Africa, and 97% of them are micro enterprises. So enterprises with 1 up to 10 staff members. We know that most of these MSMEs are unregistered, more than 80% unregistered. And the main reasons for lack of registration and lack of formalization is limited incentives like taxation and costly processes and bureaucracy. We are confident that focusing on MSMEs will allow us to have a significant impact in protecting and creating more jobs, because 83% of all the private sector workers in Africa work in micro, small, and medium enterprises. So with this in mind, the 100,000 SMEs Initiative is providing access to services that we are developing in-house or that we have already developed in-house. The initiative also helps create a coalition of organizations under one umbrella, and these organizations can either share the content services that they have already developed, or they can help us co-create content and services. We are obviously working hand in hand with the African Union Commission, with traditional development partners, with African Union member states, with private sector, civil society, and finance sector. But we also need the press in many areas. And let me also give you 4 points, 4 areas where we need the support of the press. We need to keep the strategic issues in the forefront of the discussions. With the COVID-19 crisis, we can see that short-term measures to support private sector, African private sector, these measures are welcome, they are necessary, but for Africa to be able to create a resilient system that would be able to protect employment and to create consistently create a significant number of jobs. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So these issues need to be kept high in the discussions. This is the first point. Second, the press should help us sensitizing the public opinion about the importance of these issues and providing explanation, breaking down the dynamics at play when it comes to forming public policies, explain the policies, and disseminate to the public. And we hope that the media network, the Agenda 2063 media network, is a space for you to strengthen your own understanding and also be able to disseminate better. This is the second point. Third point, and this is why also I appreciate these opportunities to engage with you, please hold us accountable. We say something, today is September 2020. When we meet again, don't hesitate to come back to the issues we have developed and hold us accountable, because we need what we call the fourth power to be able to balance out the power dynamic. And the fourth point, it's good to recall that partnership is literally at the core of NEPAD. We need the press to help us disseminate information about our activities so that it can reach the beneficiaries, specifically the micro enterprises and non-formalized enterprises I made reference earlier. I want to give you an illustration. We are currently training micro, small, and medium enterprises on access to finance in 8 countries with our partner EcoBank. To work around the social distancing measures that are in place in most of these countries, the training sessions are done completely virtually. In some countries, we were able to partner with local radio stations in order to broadcast live the training sessions. And we were able to reach out to 6,000 listeners in Togo and over 80,000 listeners in Ghana who had access to this very valuable information on access to finance. Let me conclude by saying that COVID-19 pandemic has been and is still a very humbling experience for all of us, as the CEO made reference to. No one can say for sure how and when this will end, sorry. And this is making also reference to the deep uncertainty the CEO was mentioning earlier. But one thing we can all agree on is that through the crisis and after the crisis, business as usual is not an option. We should take this opportunity to challenge the status quo and to do things differently, to do them better with more transparency and more inclusiveness. And for that, I trust I can count on the good people, ladies and gentlemen from the media, to help us share the same vision and shape what will be the next normal. Vivi, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fatih. Thank you very much appreciated your points on noting the role and centrality of the youth in Africa's development. And I remember a while ago, we were in a webinar with Dr. Mayaki, and there were 2 youths, and they challenged him to say, well, if you look at the leadership in Africa, where is the youth? Where are the youth in ensuring that policies that are designed are also taking youth considerations into account, and highlighting the necessity of developing African industries so that we produce Africa and we consume Africa. There's the only way we can really move forward in this agenda. And accountability, that's one of our challenges on the continent. If we can hold ourselves accountable and make sure that we are accountable to the communities that we serve, I think we can manage to make strides in tackling this scourge of COVID in our times. Thank you once again, Fatih. So let me move, ladies and gentlemen, right along to our next speaker, who is Ms. Patiswa Magopeni. She is the Group Executive for News and Current Affairs at SABC, South Africa, based in Johannesburg. She will be speaking to us on the post-pandemic Will things change for the better or for worse? Let's hope for the better. Over to you, Patiso. And she has a presentation to be projected. May you please put it up on the screen for her to make reference to? Welcome, Patiso. Over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to see if you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
You can see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you scroll right up to the start? Yes, we're here.
Patiso, you have 7 minutes. Mind you.
Okay, again, all right. Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. This is a moment for us to learn and share experiences. And one of the things that I want to go straight to is, it's a very tricky sort of kind of topic that I've been assigned, because I'm looking at change and therefore the better or for worse and post-COVID-19. I think there's a need to contextualize the kind of change that we're talking about, and also looking at what we think represents better and what represents worse. If you look at the status quo of the news and media space, I mean, the problems that we see that the media is experiencing are not new, but have been aggravated by the COVID-19 impact. COVID-19 has exposed serious inadequacies in the media sector generally, for the underreported communities and those in the periphery of society. And the situation hasn't been good anyway. Also, if you look at the resourcing of the institutions themselves, media under-resourcing perpetuates information inequalities. I mean, pre-COVID-19, we've seen an elitist and a classist allocation of resources and access to news and information. And what this means is that we have been neglecting those who are sitting in the periphery of society. And these are people who die in the shadows. And also looking at news and information as something that's a public good and not a privilege. I mean, COVID-19 has exposed a serious lack of investment in specialist skills and coverage, meaning that expert fields are not receiving the attention they deserve in news media coverage. I mean, just look at health and medicine and science and innovation fields and the provision for these in the different newsrooms. To be able to ask pertinent questions and productive questions, you need to know what you're dealing with. So if you're not an expert in any of these fields, you are going to be found wanting. I mean, we've been fortunate at SABC News to have editors and reporters who are naturally curious, but it needs to go beyond curiosity. So you need the skills. I mean, also looking at the orientation of our media, particularly news media. There's a lack of public orientation. And what becomes a problem is that the proximity to the state, corporate, and political machinery by the media deprives society of essential public affairs content that reflects the lived reality of citizens. And this cannot continue. And this is all pre-COVID-19. Also, the urban-centric and convenience-based coverage results in us providing content that has limited relevance and resonance with the majority that needs it. Yes, it is true that public affairs content is inherently economically inefficient because you don't get the kind of return on investments that you can count in rands and cents. But it provides value and positive externalities on society that go beyond economic transactions. And this is something worth considering. Also, the media tends to neglect its transformative and developmental value. And without any doubt, information is the glue that holds societies and nations together, and it is critical to facilitating human development and progress. This role cannot be underplayed, and therefore media can't just decide to walk away from it because of what we call resource constraints. There has to be provision for that. So what is the change that we are looking for? And what is it that we need to consider, knowing what COVID-19 has exposed as the status quo? So we need change that adds value to citizens' lives and experiences. Not change for the sake of change, but change that's impactful and meaningful. And also COVID-19 has redefined journalism and forced a back to values approach, something that we have been drifting away from. So basically we are being taken back to the elements of journalism that are espoused by Kovach and Resential. And three of those are key. So we need to go back to reigniting journalism's first obligation, which is to the truth, because we need to commit to truth, and this is important for our credibility and relevance as news media. And we need to rekindle journalism's first loyalty to citizens. We need to be totally allegiant, loyal to the citizenry of the countries that we are based in. And we also need to ensure that journalists maintain independence from those they cover. And this should be done without fear or favor. And this is something that I'm going to refer to as towards the end, because this is something that we are seeing coming up in different countries, and it's a serious threat to journalism that we are seeing a cap in media freedom. So what is the kind of future that we are looking for? Of these 5 points that I've shown here: public's right to know, relevance and responsiveness, incisive watchdog journalism, and resourcing of universal access, at the center of all of that, we need coordination, and this will be done through digital transformation. So the future of the media, in my view, knowing what we know now as what existed before COVID-19 and where we are now with post-COVID-19 impact. So the future of the media is now, it's not tomorrow. So what has happened is that COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation. So we need to continue and emphasize the approach that we need to see content strategies through digital eyes. We're sitting here in a virtual setup, and we need to do more of this, but it's got to be of value to audiences and not just an operational issue within limited spaces like we're doing now. So we need digitally enabled news and information strategies that foster transparency and public accountability. So this is a critical issue. And we need to consider inclusive plurality, and this talks to one, representation in terms of the voices that dominate our news coverage. And you always hear this thing that the most affected section of the population in terms of what COVID-19 has done, it's women, but we hear less of women in our coverage. And we need that multiplicity of views, and we need to make an effort to make sure that all voices matter and all voices count. And one of the things that talk to inclusive plurality, it's language consideration. So effective communication can only be achieved if the message is relayed in languages that people understand. So predominantly English COVID-19 messaging from government and scientists excluded a majority of South Africans who rely on African languages. I don't know how the situation has been in other countries, but media platforms, as they rely on media platforms as in African languages as their primary source of news, particularly with radio. I mean, SABC is running about 18 radio stations, but we are servicing all official languages in the country. So once you don't provide for that segment in their own languages, it becomes a problem to really achieve effective communication. So this has been left to the media, particularly public service media like us, to mediate and translate technical, scientific, and medical terms into various African languages. While we can do that, but considering that newsrooms are not necessarily equipped for such demands, this poses a problem, particularly for a health pandemic, that you could end up with mistranslation that could lead to hysteria and putting people's lives at risk. So these are the dangers that come with translation, particularly in a health pandemic where you have technical expertise that's required in the newsroom that you don't necessarily have. So as a newsroom, we have had to be extra vigilant and take additional responsibility to ensure that the messages that we convey are accurate and relevant for the different audiences. But also the role of the media as transformative, incisive watchdog journalism cannot be understated. I mean, we still need credible, relevant, and responsive media. Responsive, I've had BB making reference to this. We really need to be responsive to the information and news needs of the different populations that we serve. It is critical for public trust and confidence. And also the other issue is to make sure that for us to be able to fulfill our role as watchdogs, we need appropriately resourced media enterprises. Cutting back on news media resources undermines the very existence of journalism. It diminishes its role in pursuing public and corporate accountability, which is central to the role of the media. And this is my concluding point.
Okay.
if you look at the free flow of information, which is the point I was referring to, and the need for journalists to have the right space to exercise their craft, free flow of information and the public's rights to know have to be guaranteed. State brutality against journalists and the suppression of media freedom that is being experienced by media professionals in different parts of the continent is atrocious and detrimental to the development and strengthening of our democracies. And we cannot keep quiet about it and hope that it is going to disappear by itself. This must come to an end. Citizens must take a stand in defense of the public's right to know. And this has been more critical during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's going to continue to be so as we start to see the fallout, the socio-economic fallout from the impact and the dislocation of different segments of society as a result of that impact. But as Alan Rasbridger puts it, power needs witnesses, and witnesses need to be able to speak freely to an audience. The truth can only flow from agreed facts. Facts can only be agreed to if they can be openly articulated, tested, and contested. And I add, without any hindrance. So the issue of media freedom and independence of media houses from government and corporate establishments is key for the citizens to get what they need to know in terms of news and information. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for highlighting some really pertinent points around suppression of the media and threats to our democracies, but more importantly, a look at the brutality to the citizenry without no fear, no favor. Journalists have to go back to the values approach and really get back to the roots. Why do journalists and the media exist is to communicate the right information with the truth that cannot be bent so that the masses benefit from this kind of information across the board at all levels, in rural, in the cities, in urban areas, because indeed there's a bias. Language use as well as accessibility of the type of media. So once again, thank you very much. And moving right along to Ms. Nia Malan. Ms. Nia Malan is the editor-in-chief and executive director of Beki Sisa. I wish I knew what that meant. Here in South Africa. She's going to be talking to us on the credible sources of information, the role of media startups, and the media landscape post-COVID-19. Over to you, Mia.
Thank you very much, Bibi. And to answer your question, Bekisisa is a isiZulu word in South Africa that means to scrutinize. And if a Zulu patient goes to a doctor and wants to be checked out really well by the doctor, the Zulu patient will ask, can you Bekisisa me? So that's where we come from. So to get to the credible sources of information during COVID, I think one of the biggest challenges during fast-moving epidemics like COVID-19 is access to credible information and sources of information. And it's really important because, as we've seen in COVID, misinformation during an epidemic like this has the ability to be lethal. It can destroy communities and literally lead to loss of life. But with COVID, something else that we've seen is one of the consequences of operating in an environment where the need for information on potential treatments and vaccines is so urgent. One of the consequences is that the publication of research is fast-tracked, which means that scientists skip traditional peer-reviewed processes to publish their research faster in the form of preprints. And this has created a lot of challenges for the media, especially because COVID has changed all journalists into health journalists practically overnight, but without equipping them with the scientific knowledge to evaluate whether a particular study's results is credible or not, or whether the study's design is appropriate for the kind of results that the researchers claim to have come up with. And this has resulted in preprint results, often in the media being presented as the gospel, just for it to be proven wrong 2 weeks later and causing a lot of confusion. Now, in terms of credible sources for information, I think the biggest immediate challenge for the media for credible information will be in the form of, vaccine knowledge, because within the next couple of months, we'll see a lot of progress with vaccine trials, and we'll also see some vaccines becoming available within the next 2 years or so. Now, the challenge is that vaccine science is complex, and it will be detrimental if we as the media report on it incorrectly, because we will create either false hope, or if we underplay the effectiveness of vaccines within the context of a growing lobby of anti-vaxxers that will no doubt become more prominent once effective vaccines become available, because we'd really like people to then take up the vaccines. So I think now more than ever is the time to equip journalists with knowledge through trainings and webinars, and luckily, during the period of COVID, it's become easier to present trainings because we got used to webinars and digital training more than previously. And I think it's also a real good opportunity that's presented, because political and business journalists who may never have been interested in this type of science journalism training if there wasn't an epidemic will now be open to it. And an example is a training that Bekesisa hosted in August and July for journalists in Africa on epidemiology. And of our 63 participants, 2/3 were not health journalists. They were political journalists, general journalists, and business journalists. And that the epidemiological knowledge will now stay with them beyond COVID-19, which is a long-term impact that because we took an opportunity during a time that journalists would be more open to this. In terms of what the COVID-19 media landscape would look like, I think the economic model of the media was broken long before COVID. COVID really just accelerated what was already there. We've seen considerable loss of income, and as a result, the closing down of publications and many, many job losses. Just here in South Africa alone, about 700 media professionals lost their jobs the past 6 months, and 2 large publications and 80 smaller publications closed down entirely. I think we are therefore going to see a rather fast increase in reader revenue models in the form of membership and the subscription models, and also combination funding models that rely on a combination of advertising, of reader revenue, and philanthropic support. I believe in terms of philanthropic support, donor-funded journalism is going to start to play an increasingly important role for 2 reasons. Firstly, it can provide cash-stripped mainstream media organizations with content for free, now that they really don't have the money to appoint more reporters. But secondly, a point that relates to what Patricia was saying, it can provide them with specialist content. We don't have enough specialist reporters, and particularly science-based health content. And that's the type of content that is more expensive to produce than general news, because specialist skills normally come at a higher price than general skills. And a clear need for that was generated during COVID-19. I think we will also see more and more donor-funded media startups that will specialize in niche content, including more fact-checking and data journalism outlets within the context of so much misinformation that we're currently seeing. But this will come with a challenge, with a significant requirement for skills that go far beyond what we traditionally view as journalism skills, such as fundraising and branding skills that are crucial for creating and maintaining a media startup. And this may hold quite a few implications for the curriculums of journalism skills. And what skills do we equip journalists when we train them with? Just writing and producing stories is no longer the only skills required. I think more media startups will necessarily mean that when the news media in general will have to rely on partnerships more to survive. to produce diverse content. And that may mean that we will have to work together closer than previously, and we may have to become open to partnerships that we would not have considered before. And lastly, as we are we done with print publications, and are we done with physical newsrooms? We've seen in New York, for instance, the New York Daily permanently closed down its newsroom in August. It obviously saves huge amounts of money, but I personally believe that there is a definite need for in-person newsrooms, but I also certainly think that the amount of space that newsrooms will now require will reduce, and that the way forward is most likely a combination of home and office working, and more home working than we saw pre-COVID. Is it the end of print? I think when the print media's model, economic model, broke almost 2 decades ago with the emergence of Google and later Facebook, it already started to signal the end of print publications. COVID really just accelerated this process. But having said that, we've seen interesting developments. For instance, in South Africa, the Daily Maverick, which is a digital publication, launched a print newspaper 2 weeks ago in the middle of an epidemic. But it is one with a difference and a very creative, untraditional distribution model that keeps consumer costs extremely low. You can get a weekly edition for free with a free shopper's card at a major outlet here in South Africa, or you can buy it for just 20 rands, which is about $1. So not necessarily the end of all print publications, but certainly the end for most traditional publications that will have to consider innovative non-traditional ways of distribution if they want to survive. Thank you, Bibi.
Thank you very much, Mia, for, oh gosh, I learned a lot, you know. I'm not a journalist, I'm not in the media, I'm not in communications, so this is quite exciting for me. It saddens me to realize that, you know, print publications are going to be going out of fashion, if I may put it like that. Some of us are very traditional, we still like, you know, turning the page. But your point around training journalists so that they can report adequately on health and medical issues is very, very important to reduce the risk of misinformation and provide false hope and just get people more confused. So I think these are very critical issues to get credible information out there through the right hands and through the right channels. And then the point you make about donor-funded media startups, very critical, because we have to start thinking outside of the box, do business differently in terms of harnessing unusual, you know, not business as usual partnerships, you know, so that we can really move the agenda forward and without losing much ground and without losing our audiences. So thank you once again. In the interest of time, I was hoping to get a couple of clarification questions, but I will not. Rather, if participants may post their questions and their chats in the boxes as provided, we'd appreciate that. We'll deal with them during the interactive session. Now, ladies and gentlemen, moving to the second set of panelists, we are going to be looking at experiences of the media and communications and communicators in Southern Africa. And to kick us off in this regard is Mr. Chilulemba, who is a voice artist from Zambia and South Africa. He's going to be addressing observations of changes in the media landscape. Over to you, Mr. Chilu.
Thank you so much, Bibi. So to start with, by way of introduction, my name is Chilulemba, as has been said, Zambian based in South Africa. And you might know the voice, might not necessarily know the face, but if you listen to radio, this is Eyewitness News. I do stuff like that. If you're in South Africa, you might recognize that. In the rest of the continent, on Supersport, you know, that's what I do. I'm glad and honored to be here with you. I read the concept note regarding this discussion, and 2 points stood out to me. One of them is to do with loss of revenue and jobs in the media industry. As a freelancer, I looked at that closely. There's another point about reported losses of advertising revenue in the media industry. And what I wanted to point out is that my experience has been somewhat different. And the summary of my experience is that a number of us are still busy just working differently. So to illustrate this, I'd like to talk about 2 phone calls that I received in March when the lockdown was about to start at level 5 in South Africa. The first one was from my agent. She had been bombarding me with scripts by email for me to record at home, because the lockdown had been announced. Sun City, the hotels were closed, and they needed messages like, you've reached Sun City. The hotels will be closed until the 17th of April, which was the magic date during that time. World Health Organization needed an announcement in conjunction with MultiChoice. There were all these COVID-19 related messages. So when she called, I told her, I think this period is going to be very busy. And she said, fingers crossed. We don't know what's going to happen, but you work from home. Let's see how it goes. 6 months later, and my experience has been, I've been busier during COVID pandemic than say the 6 months prior to that. And that's been the case with a number of other freelance people that I know. And in my case, I think the reason why that is what you do sometimes is you observe a market that's ahead of you to see how they're insulating themselves from certain trends. So in the voiceover industry, I attend conferences in the US, and what I noticed is that out of 300 voiceover artists, almost all of them had home studios. I started building mine. It's been operational for over 10 years. Whereas in South Africa and Africa in general, we go to studios to record stuff for clients. And so when the lockdown kicked in, a lot of people didn't know what to do, but some of us were geared and armed regarding that. Let me talk about the second phone call. Before I do that, I just wanted to say that the US was already in that space. So I knew that South Africa would get there at some point. But what COVID has done is it's accelerated that period of time. It's kind of like compressed it, and we're there now, based on the pandemic. Second phone call happened in March. A friend of mine named Tebogo Malope, some of you might know him. He directed Queen Sono and a number of other big productions. He phoned me, and the first question was, Chilu, how old is your daughter? So I said, I've got 2. One is 12, one is 14. Then he says, hold on. I was on hold for a long time wondering, what's this about? I knew he's got a son. The son is 2, so it couldn't have been arranged marriage or anything, But eventually, and to cut the long story short, what had happened is his company had been commissioned to do an ad for Samsung, a TV ad. Their challenge, obviously, is it's level 5 lockdown. People cannot travel. You can't have a crew in a household. So he asked me, do you have cameras? Yes. Do you have internet? Yes, I've got fiber. We need an ad where it's a daughter, father, mother, and he described this ad to me. I'm going to see if I can play for you real quick. You'll just see the visuals. And we did this ad. Technologically, we were able to pull it off. There were 4 people in the house at the time, my family and somebody who had a permit to help me work the cameras. But the thing was being controlled. The camera that we had was being controlled from Cape Town. Technologically, that's possible. I didn't know. My computer was being controlled by Clive Sherlow in Cape Town. The shots were being framed and being directed by Tebogo using Zoom and all these other things. 24 hours later, we had this ad that you're looking at right now. It's been on TV, it's showing at shopping malls. And in short, the takeout is this. People are going to be looking at people like us from the media as content creators. And what needs to happen is we need to acknowledge that we should get the tools which will equip us to be able to provide the services remotely, because the world has changed. My last and my parting shot is 24.6 million people tuned in to watch the 2020 Democratic Convention in the US. And this is what the control room looked like. That's director Carl Weiss in his living room, barefoot. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that's the new normal. So in my case, I need to be equipped with microphones and cameras. Your case, you might just need a power bank that will allow you to put out reports, efficiently for your stakeholders. So that's my presentation, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chilu. It's very interesting that as everybody was struggling and grappling with job losses, revenue cuts, you actually had a very interesting, different and positive experience. So for me, this presents an opportunity for us to think differently around how we can create news, how we can share news, and how we can keep people engaged and informed. So well done to you. And that, we need to, your experience was about getting, more requests around COVID messaging and getting those messages out, and remote working. I think all of us since March, we have not set foot in the office, and it is indeed a new normal, and I don't know how much things are going to change. So engaging with the right tools and innovation to produce the goods that we need to produce, I think remains at the helm and very critical for doing work going forward and getting the results for impact that we need. Thank you once again, Mr. Chilu. Moving right along, we have Mr. Charles Mukulka. Mr. Charles Mukulka is the lead partner for ecosystems, partners and communications from Marabi. Media experiences in Malawi he'll be talking about. Over to you, Mr. Charles. Charles, may you unmute yourself, please, and turn on your camera. Technical backroom, can you please unmute Mr. Mukulka? Did we lose Mr. Mukulka? If he is not available, let's move right along. We'll come back to him. May I invite Ms. Doreen Chilumbunawa. She's a journalist with the Daily Mail in Zambia, and she's going to be talking about experiences out of Zambia. Over to you, Doreen.
Good morning, and good morning, everyone. The impact on COVID-19 here in Zambia has been so multiple, because like Dr. Mayaki said, it was something unexpected, something that almost everyone wasn't ready with. And from my experience, this has brought about a lot of financial stress in media houses, and some of them have even launched the restructuring plans to reduce on manpower. And another point is the social distancing guidelines have also triggered the closure of offices requiring people to work remotely. And this may increase cybersecurity risks on the part of media personnel, because like right now, as journalists here in Zambia, most people would conduct their interviews, do their work remotely, and very few people would. Someone who is right behind the computer, you don't know which person you're talking to. So as in terms of information gathering, this is quite a challenge too, because you will send a press query to someone who will take like a week when you need that information the same day. They'll take it because they're trying to investigate who this Doreen is who has sent this press query, and why does she want this information. And because when someone is working from home, they have their own schedule of what to do, and sometimes it's not easy to just get hold of them and get them attend to your request. So of course, there's been some innovation of some sort, like where I work from. I work with the Zambia Daily Mail based here in Lusaka. So I've seen Daily Mail launched in 2015, although it was hosted by an international company, I think somewhere in Asia. But this time around, it's hosted right here at in Zambia at the Daily Mail, and the cost for this e-paper is almost zero, because it's like one kwacha, which is like R1 for the access. And this, much as it is an opportunity or an innovation, I think it's somehow has affected the advertising, the losses in advertising revenue, because I think all of us know that internet access in Africa, even here in Zambia, in remote areas, it's not accessible to many at all. Most people would rather get a loaf of bread than buy a copy of a newspaper, so to check what advert is there, whether it's a job advert or not. So this COVID-19 has had such challenges on the media. And from my experience, the COVID-19 is not really a new occurrence on the reduced revenue in advertising. We've seen this decline, like the past speakers have said. The uptake of digital news has taken over for like 2 decades now. We've seen the newspapers and other traditional media go under, but the pandemic has added more to this, and I think this calls for a swift and it calls for media houses and institutions to take decisive measures for us to stay afloat. And yeah, like when it comes to technology, I think I've noticed from my experience the use of radio stations, or the use of radio in rural areas being quite high now since March, when the pandemic started. But there hasn't been any research really to tell how much. But when this has been like an encounter on my part, when you go for coverage, you see people glued to a radio set just to listen to the daily updates on the COVID-19, whether there's been an increase, and because they deem you to be more enlightened, and they will come closer to you, try to find out what next step they wish to take. So again, this gives an opportunity for the media, like Patricio had said, to engage more in local languages, because most rural parts here in Zambia use different local languages. So I think as media, this may be a challenge as well as an opportunity to engage more in local languages, although it may not be easy. So I'll quickly go to my thoughts. So my thoughts on the landscape, although the status quo may not change much, but I see a change in the way we gather our news, because from March to now, like 6 months down the line, we've used our phones the more, we've used our laptops the more, because we work from home. So I feel media houses should seek to produce content remotely and distribute the content through various digital outlets, because this has been like the way of life we now know, and almost convinced that we can do almost all we want on our phones and our computers. The media too should, I think, come up with policies that will look at their workforce to determine which employees and who should work what time and where, because there's been quite a challenge where there's been like no schedule or nothing written to show that this person is working from this time to what time, and this has created some hiccups in our work as journalists. This is what from my interaction with journalists here in Zambia, this is what I seem like to get. And we need to maintain productivity by providing supporting tools for virtual communication, collaboration, and documentation for remote workers. Of course, this was something that almost everyone was not ready with, so it has created some financial challenges and some need for more funds and sponsorship, and yeah, for media to do the work perfectly, to ensure that we do not run away from our core objective, and that's to inform and educate the public. I think think that's it for me, from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doreen, my namesake. Yeah, the points you highlight around particularly cybersecurity risks, I think this is very important because a lot of people now, since you can't see the person on the other side of the phone, it's very difficult for you to release information that may put you at very high risk and can endanger your life. So I think that's a challenge that can be dealt with through a different format, but also through ensuring that policies are in place to protect the media and journalists. And then on the point of innovation, very much clear, we need more and better innovation and priorities, quite frankly. Let's face it, I mean, if people cannot afford a loaf of bread, how do we expect them to afford data bundles or afford a newspaper or afford, you know, the internet basically? So these are challenges that I think we need to face head on if we want the media to work adequately and for the media to deliver and for the information to be disseminated, absorbed and utilized by the public. And echoing again local languages, we really need to go back to the roots. We need to go back to what people best understand in terms of the language and medium of communication. So thank you once again very much. And we shall move to, if Mr. Charles Mukulka is back. Charles, do we have you online?
Yes, I am.
Okay, please go right ahead. I already introduced you, but I think you were muted and we couldn't see you on camera.
All right, thank you very much. I must admit in the first place, I think that most of the things that I had actually lined up have also been tackled by the previous speakers. I think the situation here in Malawi has not been different to the rest of its neighbors and the continent at large. Basically, in terms of communication in the time of COVID, the media has actually, faced a lot of challenges, and as far as revenue generation is concerned, when it comes to advertisement, a factor that had actually laid down most of the media houses in Malawi, so much that they had to ask, the regulatory body, the Malawi Communication Regulatory Authority, to bail them up with support because, business had actually gone down, and, this has had a bearing in terms of sustaining manpower. The other challenge has been problems related to sustaining content in terms of programming. The coming in of, the pandemic meant that some media houses had to suspend collection of content because of issues to do with restriction in terms of movement. And if you also consider the spaces in terms of the studios, it has been very difficult to bring sources inside the studios to engage them in as far as live radio programs are concerned. So this has been a major challenge, but also more importantly, on the other side, to agree with what Mia Malan had said, the issues to do with the spread of COVID-19 are more related to health. And, they also have some tenets of science in them. If you look at the pandemic itself, it's a disease that has got some biological connotations in issues to do with epidemiology, issues to do with parasitology, issues to do with pathology and all those kind of things. Now, these things, you require some technical expertise to be able to unpack them very well, to understand how does a virus, for instance, differ from a bacteria, and how does bacteria, for instance, differ to a fungus. So it would be very much pertinent, as he rightly said, to say that perhaps it's time that we commit resources to, capacitate media practitioners to be able to understand, these issues when they break up. Because if we have a media that doesn't understand these things, it's very difficult for them to be able to relay the messages to the wider public out there. The challenge that comes is now the issue of misinformation, because it's difficult for the practitioners, perhaps somebody who has actually been working on sports or arts or politics, to come in the open and say he's going to tell a story on a pandemic, an outbreak of this magnitude. So I would agree with the last speaker, Mia Malan, who made emphasis on having issues to do with specialized coverage, much as we have done in as far as issues to do with agriculture are concerned, for instance. So I think that's moving forward. That's one thing that we will need to look into context critically, so that assuming we have another disaster that emerges in the future of this nature, we will be in a position to be able to have the capacity and the technical expertise to unpack it and raise the much needed awareness at their most appropriate time. Then the other thing that also has been a challenge is that, as a continent, we are talking about issues to do with setting the pace for Africa in as far as Agenda 2063 is concerned, but also there are issues to do with the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program. These are programs that have been initiated in the past few years, and it's the wish of the AU to ensure that programs of these magnitude at the continental level, they are able to get down to the people on the ground. Now, in the wake of the COVID, you will notice that the pandemic had overshadowed all the gains that had been made in as far as advancing a collective common agenda in the name of Agenda 2063 is concerned. So it has been very challenging to get out to the grassroots. It hasn't, been very easy to take, various initiatives that need to get to the people out there. And perhaps in terms of opportunities emerging in the wake of the pandemic, I would say that in the case of Malawi, for instance, and as far as the media landscape is concerned, we have seen a surge in terms of increased digital footprint when it comes to live streaming of content and news using Facebook, for instance, so much that, the citizens that have got handsets are able to follow news easily compared to the past. So they are able to get, their news using social media platforms like Facebook, and I have also noted that at the regional scale, we have been able to see, bigger media institutions like the Mail and Guardian kickstarting an online edition. They are calling it The Continent. It's able to reach up to so many countries across Africa, and it's covering a lot of content in as far as issues to do with events unfolding in the continent is concerned. This publication has come about basically as a response to the changes that have emerged as far as the COVID-19 is concerned. So it's a publication that the Mail and Guardian is able to share on a weekly basis. It's got rich content in as far as content from the continent is concerned. So, yeah, basically, I am of the view that, the coming of the pandemic, which is almost a disaster in its own making, it needs to awaken us to ensure that we put the right investments in as far as capacitating the media is concerned, give them the resources that they need, give them the technical expertise that they might require in the event that we have a similar outbreak emerging in the future. Hello?
No, I was saying if you may wrap up.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, we are saying that perhaps it's time that we begin to make sure that we make the media relevant. I think that agrees with what the area colleague that spoke, Ms. Patricia talked about, talking about making the media relevant, making it more responsive, but also perhaps time to look at issues of multiplicity and inclusiveness in working together with various genders, but also time to begin thinking about migrating to digital information. I mean, if you have people getting in-house, not going to work, I mean, how do you get and reach out to them in form of news content? Perhaps it's time that they begin to use the various devices that they have other than the conventional means that we have been used before. So I think at the meantime, I think I can stop from there now.
Thank you very much, Charles, for that elucidating presentation and pointing us in the direction that indeed the media needs resources to be able to stay relevant and to stay responsive, and that everybody seems to be forced to be converted into being a health and medical specialist, a virologist and epidemiologist, but that cannot happen. We need the right training, we need the right tools, we need the right capacity building so that people are well equipped to be able to package messaging and transmit it appropriately. Once again, thank you very much, Charles. And last but not least, let me just remind the speakers that there are a number of questions in the Q&A box, as well as a number of charts. If you can look at those as speakers to make sure that you can be able to respond in the boxes to the questions or to the comments, so that we cut on the time and for the discussion. So let me go straight away now. Last but not least, Mr. Kizito Sikuka, who is the project manager and editor with the Southern African Research and Documentation Center based in Zimbabwe. Over to you, Mr. Kizito.
Thank you very much, moderator, and the organizers of this very important seminar. I think you will all agree with me that my two colleagues from Malawi and Zambia, who have just spoke before me, have actually adequately summed up the state of media and communication in this period of COVID-19. In this regard, my contribution as the last speaker of this session, is basically to amplify a few points that they have raised, since the impact of COVID-19 is generally the same across the region. I will also definitely add one or two unique experiences, from Zimbabwe. So maybe allow me to start with those unique, cases here in Zimbabwe. We all know that COVID-19 has brought with it its own challenges. But however, we have seen the media here in Zimbabwe come up with innovative ways to distribute and disseminate, its information to its audiences. For example, media houses here in Zimbabwe, such as Newsday, the Herald, the Daily News, have actually invested more resources in electronic distribution of their publication, a situation which was never there, before. In fact, readers can now easily access the PDF version of most local newspapers on their phones, on the computers. And this is how I see the future of media in Zimbabwe and the rest of the region. We are basically going paperless. So we will have less of these hard copy newspapers. We will need to basically embrace technology. But I think on a personal level, I would want to actually pose a question to this meeting and say, did the media have to wait for COVID-19 to embrace technology? Because previously it was rather difficult for citizens to access some of these newspapers online or electronically. So I think the issue here is that it is critical for media in Zimbabwe as well as the rest of the region to continue to invest more in technology, since COVID-19 is a phenomenon that is still with us, and we are going to be having these challenges. So we need to move along with the tune and see how best we can survive in these hard times. Another key experience from Zimbabwe is that the lockdown measures that were imposed by the country, and I think other countries in the region also did the same in terms of addressing the spread of COVID-19, greatly affected the mobility and work of most journalists. In fact, during the first few days and weeks of the lockdown, we actually had some cases where journalists were actually arrested and even harassed while on duty, because you could not easily move from one place to another. However, commendably, the government of Zimbabwe, through the Ministry of Information and with some lobbying from various media organizations such as the Zimbabwe Union of Journalists and MISA, later regarded the media as an essential service whose operation should not only be restricted during the lockdown period, given the important role that the media plays in society. So this privilege afforded to journalists has actually allowed the media to easily carry out their duties. But I would say one of the challenges that most journalists lack, the essential health equipment to work safely in this COVID period. We don't have, the protective, clothes, the protective equipment. So we still don't, venture in areas where, there are high risk of one, being infected with, with the virus. So we would need media houses and other stakeholders, to come in and then assist journalists with these health equipment. In addition to this, this new normal way of working from home has actually threatened the media industry, since journalism by its very nature is mobile. For example, you need to conduct those one-on-one interviews, attend the press conferences, but the pandemic has definitely affected the convening of such meetings. As you see, in the normal situation, we should be having this meeting in a physical place, but we are now being forced to conduct this online. Furthermore, you'd notice that most journalists here in Zimbabwe also lack the essential equipment to work safely from home. You need to have access to internet. You need to have your laptop. You need to have access to electricity. So all those really affect the way that journalists have conducted their work during this period of COVID-19. But on a positive note, COVID-19 has also seen a surge in health coverage. We've seen almost on a daily basis, there is a health story, including how the pandemic has affected the economy, how it has affected sports, tourism, which is something that, we never saw before. We've seen business journalists actually tackling, health issues, from that business point of view, which is something very good. And I think also most of you, you'll be aware that there have been some very good investigative stories that have come out of Zimbabwe exposing, corruption on COVID-19, funds. And I think it is quite good for us to say, kudos to these journalists doing their work even in these harsh times. Then I would say another positive outshoot of COVID-19 is that most journalists who were previously not on social media or were mute, because we still have our old school journalists, have actually now gone and embraced social media to communicate with their audiences, which is something very good. So basically, for me, in a nutshell, as I conclude, I would say that COVID-19 has definitely had a devastating effect on the media landscape in Zimbabwe and the rest of the region. For example, a number of media houses have been forced to cut down on their operation with no clear timeline of when they will resume, to normal business. And we've also seen advertising revenue actually declining, threatening the jobs of most journalists and even newspaper, vendors and freelance journalists. Therefore, it is critical for us as the media to accept this new reality posed by COVID-19 and gradually adjust, our work moods, especially investing, in new technology. And like I said, this is because COVID-19 is still there with us for a while, and we have to win this fight against the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kizito. Very interesting points, and I like your question around, did the media have to wait for COVID-19 to embrace technology and indeed embrace social media and adjust to the new realities? And your point about COVID-19 having exposed corruption, as we've seen that, in a number of countries, COVID funds have been squandered, unfortunately, to the detriment and to the hampering of the implementation of the planned programs for the emergency. And so once again, thank you very much. And I would like to ask now to move to the Q&A. Like I said, there are several questions on the Q&A box, some of which have already been answered. I noticed that a question that was directed to Mia on how we can minimize or ensure that fake news are not affecting our landscape. And I noticed that she answered that question on the chat box, not on the Q&A. And then there's a question directed to Dr. Mayaki, which reads like the following. You talked about collective responsibility. Now, in a time of a crisis, credible information is crucial for both developing strategies and keeping the public informed. What is your opinion on countries like Tanzania that is not sharing data? Over to you, Dr. Mayaki, then we'll take the next one. The next question from Olawale Rashid says, NEPAD is doing a lot as AUC Development Agency. What other steps are required to get the messages and programs of NEPAD to the African grassroots to facilitate post-COVID recovery? I think the two questions can be dealt with by NEPAD colleagues. If you may go ahead, Dr. Mayaki, and then maybe Fatih can take the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Bibi. The response is straightforward and clear. When a country doesn't share information with its neighboring countries, it is endangering the neighboring countries. That's the only response that can be given. That country is part of the African Union. The African Union has traced and designed a consensual approach to fighting the pandemic. And we have a CDC, which is our own institution in charge of supervising the spread of the virus, advising, counseling, putting data together and making sure that, for example, regarding cross-border issues, we have the same type of attitude. So if when one country decides not to share information, well, it is putting in danger the neighboring countries and beyond. So that's my answer. It's a straightforward and direct answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayaki. Fatih, could you look at the next question on how NEPAD can get to the grassroots to facilitate post-COVID recovery? Fatih, are you there? Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bibi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I think that when we created the 2063 media network, it was really to ensure that we have medias that help us disseminate the information on the ground. So this is one thing that we will continue doing, and we will intensify our efforts when it comes to this. Also, we will use the media to continue getting to the getting the message across when it comes to having a specific activity, ensuring that the grassroots organizations know about what is happening and how they can support. Remember, NEPAD is for all the African institutions, all the grassroots institutions. So we always have a very, very open approach where we do not keep the gates. The gate is always open for any opportunity to be available to any grassroots organization that is already working in the area. So this would be my message. If you're already working in an area, please make sure that you are you monitor AUD and NEPAD's website, and that you are aware of the opportunities so that you can come and partner with us. Again, partnership is at the core of AUD and NEPAD. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll move to the chat boxes. I think I have a couple of questions here from participants that may be best targeted to Mia and Patiswa. The first question is, COVID-19 has come with a host of new scientific terms for which the media is struggling to translate into local languages. How do we get around this? And the next question says, how accessible have experts been for media engagement? And related question, what do you consider the top 3 types of misinformation you have detected on COVID-19 in Africa so far perpetuated through the media? And then the next question, how practical is it for journalists to now start actively focusing on putting out content that brings out impact and connects with the people in an honest way in a world where political influence seems to control the media? So between Mia, Patiswa, and maybe Chilu, you can try to address these 3. Over to you in any order. Patiswa, you can take any of the questions. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with the last one, because that's my passion. The idea that journalists have to go back and do what is meant to be done in line with the principles of journalism and values of journalism. I think that is a problem in itself if we're talking about going back, because this is something that we should have been doing in the first place. And I've always had this view that journalists are a product of their environment, whether you talk about the internal environment in their operations or external environment in the space within which the media houses are located, which is your countries. The issue is that if there are no structures that protect journalism in the countries within which we operate, we are always finding ourselves vulnerable and exposed to all sorts of risks when we go to the spaces where we start asking penetrating questions, asking for accountability and questioning the stuff that we're meant to question. It becomes a huge problem when there are no protections in terms of the constitutions and adherence to the constitutions. And it's sort of kind of safe in South Africa because even though there have been attempts that is from the political sides and not necessarily legislative and regulatory issues, but from the political side where you get pressure, it's easy to say, but this is what our editorial policy says as an institution. And this is linked to the Broadcasting Act, which is a product of what was done by the country in line with the interests of the public. So it's easy to do that when you know that there are structures in place and frameworks, that is in terms of regulations, that protect you as a media house. Yes, there will always be those who are going to push the boundaries, but we also have to push back and say, but this is our space and you have no business telling us what to do. It's not easy in some of the countries, and we know, and we have seen the experiences, particularly with the recent one in Zimbabwe. But it's things that we, as the media ourselves, you also have local sort of kind of formations where you know that you have a South African National Editors Forum that will raise issues whenever there's interference with any work, or there's been threat to the life of the journalist, or there's been intimidation. They always speak out. But what it means is that you always have to report these incidents and make them visible. And yeah, the public is always there for us. We have a very strong civil society that also speaks out against intimidation of journalists. But I know it's not the same with all the other countries, but it's something that we've managed to achieve in South Africa. Yeah.
Thank you.
The last part, okay, the last part, because I did mention the issue of difficulties with translation, particularly where you have journalists that are not necessarily experts in the different fields that we've been dealing with around COVID-19. What we have been trying to do is to, in my previous life, I did teach translation. So I'm always looking out for different ways of applying translation tools into the kind of content that we get. So once you get the meaning of the concept, you can either apply communicative translation or functional translation, which works best with technical terms, because you literally have to describe things. So you literally go the descriptive way, but it's usually easy for the other language speakers to get a sense of what you're trying to do. It's not the most economical way because you end up with more time that you need to write one term in a whole paragraph because you're trying to explain. But this is what we try to do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mia, do you have anything to add? And then I'll move to Chilu.
Sure. I think Patiswa has spoken about the political things, so I don't need to speak about it. I can speak about two things. The one is for local languages, something we've done at Bekisisa is we provided, in South Africa, abortion is legal. And but a lot of women still die of illegal abortions because they simply don't know it's legal, or they don't know where to access legal and safe services. So we wanted to distribute the information of sort of like, when can you have what type of abortion? And there was a lot of, to the general public so that there's access. And there was a lot of scientific terms in there that wasn't available necessarily in local languages. So we then sent a request out on social media and asked people, our audience and our readers, to send us their translations of, it was an infographic, and I can send the link to you afterwards, in their languages. We produced it in 4 major languages of South Africa. And we then took all those voluntary translations, as Patricia has mentioned, sometimes it's long phrase for one word, and we gave it to a professional translator to work with. And the reason we got the input from the audience was that it's not just one person at an agency sitting there and deciding what a term should be, so that there's input to work with and then to decide what is the best thing to use. And we then came up with infographics that we distributed quite widely and in these languages on social media, and I'll post a link there in the chat group. With regards to misinformation, the top 3 forms of misinformation, I think most of the misinformation by journalists in the media is really not intentional. It's not malicious. It's really as a result of being forced into a field and having to report on research that happens really fast and not being equipped with being able to interpret that knowledge. To give you an example, so I think it's very important with the research that's being published on COVID to be able to know what type of study can tell you which thing. So when he said that you can prove cause and effect, and when can't you, for instance? So an example would be, you guys may remember 2 or 3 months ago, a study from France was published widely, not just in Africa, everywhere in the world. And this study found that in a French hospital, the people who developed serious COVID were, that people who smoked were less likely to develop serious COVID disease as opposed to those who didn't smoke. And of course, this is a very controversial finding, because we've got research all over the world that shows us that smoking is very dangerous for you and bad for your lungs. And this was then reported, and no one, and mostly in all of the reports, it didn't state that it wasn't a study that could find cause and effect. It was merely a study that had an association, and that there was a lot of bias built into the study. For instance, when they asked the people whether they smoked or not in this hospital for COVID patients, there is a high likelihood that people would not have told the truth, because you would feel very guilty if you go for treatment and you tell them you did something that sort of helped you to the disease to develop. So that would be an example of something that was widely reported incorrectly. And there was also an investment from tobacco companies in that research. And that if the study design was understood, I think reporters would have reported quite differently on that. And then I also think that when it comes to projection, mathematical modeling figures that would tell you, how many people would die if statisticians or mathematical modelers predict that, it's very hard to interpret. And I in South Africa have seen that information really being sensationalized because it's not reported within context. So for instance, early on in our epidemic, there were a lot of reports on how many people would die, but actually that first bit of information that was released was all based on, this is the amount of people that would die if South Africa does nothing, if we don't have a lockdown. And the information was reported without that context, and people really, it installed fear in people, and people were panicking. But meanwhile, we had a very, very early lockdown that prevented some of those infections. So I think that the most important thing is context. And we, for instance, in South Africa had, a medical research report released on excess deaths. So that it showed that we had far more excess deaths than we had COVID deaths if we compare it to the previous year. So the question arose, so why? What did the rest of the numbers die of? And it's a very nuanced thing to understand. And if you look at other countries, they also had larger excess deaths, and then later that decreased if they relooked at their figures and reconfigured them. And it's not something that you can just report on and say, we didn't report all the COVID deaths. It's far more complex than that. And you need to understand the study methods around it. And I think that is the thing that causes the most of the misinformation in countries.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mia. Chilu, may I come to you? There's an interesting question here that is saying, is Africa media on the right footing during this COVID-19 crisis? It's a question from Calista Standong in Cameroon. Over
Did you want me to answer that one? Or okay, maybe I'll come back to that. I just wanted to ventilate a couple of thoughts that I had regarding the earlier questions, if that's fine by you, Bibi.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Patiso and Mia have touched on some good points. What struck me at the beginning of the pandemic is that the World Health Organization and all these other people who were putting out the real meaty and serious information about the pandemic, they would put a lot of time and resources into press conferences and media pieces and all that kind of stuff. And then you'd find the public, put out some conspiracy theory about COVID being linked to 5G internet and whatnot. And the traction and the retweets and the reposts in WhatsApp groups would sway heavily in favor of what we'd term the nonsense. And it's just a wish on my side that, the organizations that are tasked with putting out the real information and dealing with this would maybe try and get some insights into these savvy internet people who manage to get so much attention from putting posts out. I mean, like the people obviously who've got degrees in research and journalism and so on, and they do a great job. And at the same time, you've got people who've studied these formulas. I mean, there's a song called Jerusalem done in South Africa. It's a worldwide phenomenon on so many platforms. The reach is amazing, but that's not being pushed by guys who maybe have the traditional sense of putting out information. So I think there's merit in tapping into the knowledge of some of these guys who are able to cause wildfires with information. Right now, maybe it's negative information, but to tap into it and think, how can the real information which people need be made palatable and juicy for the masses? And that's something that I think people should maybe consider going forward.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I'm being pushed for time here. I mean, we could continue with the discussion pretty much the whole day, but please understand that this conversation is being recorded, and the Q&A, as well as all the comments on the chat boxes, will be synthesized for availability to you. At this point, may I please call on Mr. Teko Nhlapo before we go to the closing remarks by Mwanja for Teko to give guidance on the feedback on the Mentimeter. On to you, Teko. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Osbibi. I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so guys, we have a webinar evaluation, which is a live evaluation. And for this, we utilize the platform called Mentimeter. So if you could go to menti.com on your smartphone or on your computer, and then utilize the code 4677527, and then you will be able to participate in this survey that we are conducting. So we have questions both in French and English. There are 4 questions, so we would like for you to be able to give us your feedback. There were over 65 participants in this webinar, so we'd highly appreciate if some of, a majority of you could partake in this. So you go to menti.com and then you utilize that code 4677527, and then you will be able to participate. This is our first question. What's your most valuable takeaway from this webinar? So we put the questions in both English and French, being the most dominant languages used in the continent. So if you could go to there and then start entering your entries as they are starting to trickle in right now. Okay, we see no spreading of fake news, the need for media houses to be more practical in using digital platforms, and then humility, research, the youth involvement and opportunities. Speakers knew what they were talking about and their voices are not boring. That's a plus for us. Yes, we even had a grade A voice artist on the line this morning, so that's very nice. So far we have like 7 entries. Very passionate speakers. Yes, indeed, they were all passionate and well knowledgeable within the field. So we're gonna go to the second question. Also, we can see that there is a comment about the rich discussion from various participants, as well as the experience of the impact of COVID, and then the use of modern technology. One thing that we could take away from this COVID, I think it had made us to utilize the webinar platforms much more than we did 5 months ago. Okay, the second question. What could have been done differently? So please tell us, what do you think we could have done differently as AUDA NEPAD on the organization of this webinar? And I would like to make mention that we had a series which covered the whole continent. So this one of Southern Africa is it's the second to last of the ones that we will conclude with. There will be one which will be continental, which we will be concluding the series with. So more time for questions. Yes, time is always an issue. The audience interaction, and then engage more participants. Yes, we had both the chat feature as well as the Q&A feature. So I think the engagement was, the engagement economy was there to be used. One is saying quite a long webinar. Indeed, SADC is one of the big regional economic communities, so we did our best for inclusion of everyone within the region. So we will wait for a few, 3 or 4 more. Yes, there was a commitment to train. And unlike any other regions, yes, Africa indeed acts as one. Okay, the next one. How do you rate this webinar overall? Excellent, good. Okay, and then the last question. Kindly let us know which gender you associate with. So we had quite more males than females participating, or we had a balance. I can see Ms. Bibi is very excited that we achieved a balance.
Indeed.
Yeah. So without much ado and wasting any time, that's all we had for today. Thank you very much, and I'll give back the space back to Ms. Bibi.
Thank you very much, Tiko, for the Mentimeter. It's always exciting to get instant feedback. I love technology. Let me call on my colleague Mwanja Nganjo to just give us a short closing remarks before we conclude the webinar, and excuse us for going a little bit over time, but these things are always exciting and there's never enough time to cover all the bases. Thank you so much. Over to Mwanja.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator Bibi. I'd like to just say thank you to all our participants that joined us this morning, running into the afternoon as well. We're most grateful for taking this time to be with us today and to share of your experiences. Just to say that we've had this series of webinars starting with West Africa, then we went to countries in the north of the continent, followed by our engagement in East Africa, and last month we had our engagement with Central Africa, and then we moved on to Southern Africa. The whole idea of having these discussions is for us to learn from one another, look at the different experiences that from different countries amongst media and communication experts. And also it's part of our way of staying in touch with what's happening on the ground, such that when we get information from you, our communicators and our media experts, we're able also to get informed in how we can fine-tune our delivery to the African countries that we serve. So I will not take too much of your time. I'll just echo our CEO, Dr. Mayaki, in saying that we remain at your service with humility as we learn to engage better with the experts out there on the field in informing our work as well. So a very, very hearty and heartfelt sincere thankfulness and gratefulness with which I approach this today. I'm really humbled by the richness of the discussions that we've had. Many thank you to our interpreters, our esteemed speakers, and all our guests this afternoon. I don't know if the CEO would like to give us his parting word. Thank you very much. We look further to engaging with you more, even through our Agenda 2063 media network and in strengthening our coalitions across the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mwanja. I don't think I have anything to add except to say I would like to believe that this is the beginning of and expansion of conversations around media engagement, communications, and indeed sharing information. So once again, thanks to everyone. You've been a wonderful audience. Without you, we could have not had this, and special thanks to the speakers and the interpreters, and to my colleagues who have been working behind the scenes, including Mwanja herself, Tiko, Buitimelo, Millicent, Linda, and others that I may have forgotten. So from my side, I'm very honored to have been moderating this session, and thanks to the CEO's support for having sat through the whole conversation. I think he had to leave earlier for another engagement. So once again, thanks to colleagues, and we shall be seeing you, and this recording shall be made available on a link to be shared with you all at some point by our communications team. Thank you very much, and have a lovely afternoon and a lovely end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.